I know you're president of the Humanist Society. Does the word
Humanist UK, yeah.
Does the word activist sit comfortably on your shoulders?
I don't think so. I think activists are much more active than I am. I'm a sort of
inactivist.
armchair
I have a bit
activist.
of that. I'll be an inactivist. Up the revolution, but let someone else.
I don't think I deserve I don't deserve activists. I think there are activists that would kind of look over, really, mate?
So what word would we use? Because you don't confine your advocacy to comedy and...
No, I don't. Do you know what it is, James? I get asked to support certain things, and I do. I just get asked, and I like it, and it's interesting for me, and it makes me feel, I can't live without variety in my life. I get bored so quickly, and one of the things I cherish the most in my life is the opportunity to meet new people all the time and talk and move forward, and it's fun.
And one of the reasons, presumably, that you get asked to represent interest is because your own backstory fits you for a variety of roles.
I do. I fit into quite a few boxes. I get that.
I didn't mean it like that.
No. It's fine because
Actually, I really didn't mean it like that, because I don't think you do. I mean, you might fit into several boxes, but by dint of fitting into a variety of boxes, you defy simple pigeonholing, actually.
That's a lovely way to see it. I'm going to start seeing it myself that way.
Multiplicity of pigeonholes.
You know what it is? I think that, given my background, I feel a sense of responsibility. And sometimes I get envious of comedians who are just silly and ridiculous.
Yes.
And brilliantly just
Well, this is
off the
already
wall.
common ground with some of the previous Unfiltered guests who also could confine themselves to an easier life, whether it's... Actually, Lily Allen would be a good example, who could just crack on with being a pop star, but feels this sense that she kind of needs to speak up for people that no one else is speaking up for.
There is a responsibility. You don't come to a country with the father I have, with the background that I have, and ignore requests for help.
Well, let's begin with that background then. Born in Iran, in Tehran, in 1973, so about 4 or 5 years before the Glorious Revolution.
Yeah.
Which changed everything for your family.
Absolutely. It did change everything. And my parents were supporters of the revolution because they hated the Shah, the dictator Shah. They saw him as somebody who helped to demolish Britain's fledgling democracy, where there was the first democratically elected Prime Minister, Mossadegh, who nationalised Iranian oil. So the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company became British Petroleum, and that meant a lot to Iranians. And that was quashed in a coup d'etat by, I'm bashfully saying, Britain with CIA money. So they supported the revolution. That's why it irks me and people like me when it's called the Islamic Revolution. I've seen, and it wasn't. It was the popular people's revolution, and the way that people, to my political persuasion, see it is it's the revolution that was hijacked.
So a precursor to a lot of what went on in the Arab Spring then, in a way, where you have a popular as opposed to populist movement coming up from the streets, but then it actually gets hijacked by Napoleon out of Animal Farm in a way.
Yeah, because you're never, as a nation, as vulnerable as you are when there's a revolution, you know. So my father and I and my family, we were all in England in 1978. My dad was a very popular journalist, a columnist.
Well, so can you think of a British equivalent, or would that be tough? Because actually they tend to put you on tram lines in this country, whereas your dad could write poems on a Monday, newspaper columns on a Tuesday.
Maybe you mixed with John Hegley.
That sounds awful. Absolutely terrifying. I was thinking more like Clive James, actually, or someone like that, perhaps. He's very, very funny and very... the crucial thing about my dad's writing is it's very everyday. It was he had a satirical magazine called Asghar Agha, which translates as Joe Blogs. He's very much and when you have a country like Iran, where there's such a huge amount of the population who are literary but not literate. Yes.
Somebody who's...
So the spoken word tradition.
Absolutely.
Sort of
someone whose poems they can memorise and they can relate to is massively, massively popular. So when dictators come through, they sort of go for the artists, don't they?
Usually. Why do you think that is? Because of that connection with ordinary people. It's empathy as well, isn't it? Because if you need someone to empathise with someone whose experience is different, and you don't know anything about that experience, it's usually the artist that gives you an idea of what it would feel like to be the other person. So I spent a long time when Trump was on the march trying to work out why they have such a problem with, and also why Paul Dacre has such a problem with lovies and art, and it's because art generally gives empathy. Empathy is the enemy of fascism.
You know, that's so interesting you said that, because when they started to say lovey this and denigrating people by saying lovey and slagging off Hamilton, it's, oh, just sing, don't give us opinions, it really made me think
Did it resonate?
Of the Iranian...
Back in your box.
Yeah, back in your box. We don't want any of that compassion here, thank you very much. It made me think of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
When did you become conscious? Because you've already leapt to England. I want to take you back to Tehran. When did you become conscious that your father was poised to become an enemy of the new state, as it were, or indeed had become? Because you were only 4 or 5 years old. You wouldn't know that, would you?
No, that happened when we were in England, and we just heard. And everyone, it was all, be careful, Huddy, and death threats on the phone. My mum would always pick up the phone and she'd have to put it back down again. And also my dad's situation was not unique. You know, we heard of other people who had been assassinated and stuff. And I think it really hit home. It really changed our lives in 1984 when Scotland Yard came to our house and told us that there was a plot to assassinate my dad, and we had to go away that day, that minute.
You remember that?
Go. Oh, yeah.
11 is an
11.
age you're conscious of everything around you. And I suspect you probably weren't shy of asking questions of your mum and dad about what was going on and stuff.
No, it was almost like, oh, right, it's happened. It's happened. It was this dark cloud over our heads, and it's happened because we heard that they were doing this now. They were exporting terrorism. And it was, I think that day changed all 4 of us. For, you know, it was really...
were you frightened?
Terrified.
Genuinely. Because you could, I mean, it's almost too scary to be processable, but not when it's happening to you.
You know what? I didn't process it till I did a show about it in 2006. And when I look back on that show, I hadn't processed it even then. It's only now when I look back and just think all the behaviours that we have within our family were all, so much of it attached to the fact that we lived in terror. Because that's the job of terrorists, right? They terrify you. Like, killing you is just the tip of the iceberg.
And there was nothing your dad could have done to take himself off this list. I know that's a slightly odd question.
Yeah, giving up work.
He would.
Giving up writing.
So they were still disseminating his work back at home and still spreading his satire and his criticism of government. And the threat is as old as time itself, which is shut up or
absolutely. Well,
pay
because
the price.
So many Iranians had left. I love the word diaspora.
It's a lovely word.
The Iranian diaspora. So my father...
Although it's usually voluntary.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, to an extent, my dad's was voluntary. You know, he could have put his pen down.
Yes.
I love these writer metaphors. And just sort of towed the line, like many, people did. You know, there are the brilliant Iranian cinema going on by directors who navigate the system, But in exile, he published his own magazine, and that was a real labour of love, but it was so widely read by the Iranian diaspora. And I remember every Friday, because we had no money, and so all our friends would come, and it was all run on donations. And we would all have a job. Someone would fold, someone would stick stamps, someone would stick the address labels. You had to be quite high up in the hierarchy to stick the address labels. I was always like the dimwit that had to fold because I was the littlest and I always got things wrong. And our house was always full of these massive grey postal sacks where my dad's newspaper was distributed all over the world, and that was why.
That was the crime in the eyes of the Ayatollah.
Absolutely.
By now. How quickly did it fall apart, the revolution? How quickly did it become clear that the...
6 months, my dad says.
Okay.
6
months of hope, diminishing, declining hope.
Absolutely. And I mean, oh God, it's such a brilliantly complicated and dramatic story. But just to stay on my dad's situation, I went to The Hague where I got transcripts of the trial where my dad's would-be assassins were brought up by a witness. Because the reason my dad wasn't assassinated was there was an informant who then exiled himself to Düsseldorf but saved my dad's life. And
this would be the 84 assassination.
Yes,
okay.
Because some years later there was another bigger assassination in a cafe called Mykonos in Germany, where 6 Kurdish dissidents were assassinated. So it's in their trial that this same witness said, yes, I was privy to this attack, as was I to the one of Shappi Khorsandi in 1984. And my dad's death order was signed by the Ayatollah himself. And the code name to trigger the attack on my dad was, the code was, let the celebrations begin.
Wow. And you discovered this as a young woman.
Yeah. Yeah. And I look back on it and I think, you know, my dad kept so much away from us about all this. And I look back on it and I sort of forgive my dad for a lot of his craziness.
Okay. And that's odd, because I was going to ask a question that might have led to forgiveness of a different kind. Did you ever resent him for putting this target on your family's
Yeah, when I was a kid, yeah.
Go on.
I didn't understand. I loved him very much and I was very proud of him. And I have to say, I enjoyed my dad's fame. Yes. I enjoyed the fact that I had this famous dad.
You Hattie's little girl.
I'm Hattie's little girl. A party wasn't a party unless my dad was there. People would check my dad's availability before they planned a social event. I loved all of that. However, I kind of wish he worked. I had this little fantasy that my dad was the guy outside Ealing Broadway Station that sold the Evening Standard.
Yes.
I thought, why can't you be that guy?
Because there's not going to be any
there's no danger
midnight
there.
flits.
Just Standard, Evening Standard.
And was it, I don't want to kind of cliche anything, but was there a sense of sometimes, for some periods, every time there was a knock on the door, you'd be worried?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I still fear that. I'm still not right with all of that. I get very paranoid very quickly. When I moved into my new house 5 years ago, so I was pregnant with my daughter and I had a 5-year-old son and it was just the 3 of us. And I moved into a new house, and in the first week, I think I called the police twice because I was absolutely convinced there was someone in the house with us. It's ridiculous. There's no way there would have been. And I had to sort of sit down and go, obviously I'm pregnant, so I'm hyper sensitive and protective. And also because, you know, that was always like a waking fear.
Even now. So
yeah, it's real. In 2006, I had a write-up of my show about all this in the Telegraph, and I had never been written about in papers before, so all of that was surreal. And the guy tried to make my show something it wasn't, and he said something along the lines of, who knows if the same people that wanted to get her dad will see this show and history will repeat itself. And he wrote that, and it destroyed me. Destroyed me. I thought, why would you put... And then he said, she swaggers round the stage holding her pint without mentioning it was a pint of water. And so I was really terrified. And I remember one night all the Perrier Awards people were in because my show was rumoured to be longlisted. And that day, the day that they all came in for like the 3rd or 4th time to make their final decision, in the front row, I had 2 women who were wearing hijabs and 2 men who were bearded.
Right.
And it was a really tiny room, like 50-seater room, crammed, and they sat in the front, and I convinced myself that they were from the Iranian embassy and they'd come to check out my show. So I edited it as I went. And at the end, of course, they weren't. They didn't smile very much because they couldn't speak very much English. And they weren't from the Iranian embassy. And I do think that the Islamic Republic of Iran, in a massive way, ruined my chances of a really cool award that year.
I think we'll put that near the top of their crimes against humanity.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely. So you've got to get
it's all about me.
We've got to get our priorities sorted. So Britain becomes your second home, because it's clear talking to you that Iran has a special status in both generations of your family's worldview. You're a little girl. You're a little Iranian girl, presumably in 1978, 1979. You were Pakistani in the eyes of a lot of people.
Yeah, I really was. Pakistani is polite. I'd just stop at Paki.
Yes.
Yeah, I was.
And that must have been quite a culture shock to have come from a place where you were part of the homogenous population to come to a place where not only are you Iranian, but you're Pakistani.
Yes.
What was that like? What was in a minority, but you're not in the minority that you're being abused for being.
I know. All of that was very, very strange. And then I went to a big-ass comprehensive school that was that I didn't fit in, because even like with the Asian kids, I didn't fit into a religion bracket.
No, of course.
That was quite important at my school.
Was there never religion in the family home? It was always?
Never, no. There's no one really religious. I was actually thinking, I don't know anyone in my family who is religious. My granny used to pray.
Yes.
But she used to do it as like mindfulness. You know, she'd done it since she was little, and it was like her way of meditating. Bit like me with my adult colouring in book.
It's a bit like me with church, actually. I go to church because I was raised that way, but I'd see it more as meditation, a bit like yoga without having to stretch and just sit there.
I shouldn't say this as president of the Humanist UK, but I love a bit of church.
It's nice. Even Dawkins talks about how he likes the pageantry and the ceremony and the Christmas carols. But,
yeah.
But it wasn't.
I'm really whispering that.
No, it's fine.
If I did have a religion, I think it probably would be Christianity, because of school and all of that.
Yeah, of course.
And
you can keep it relatively moderate in this period of history. Christianity lends itself to sort of shallow end type contemplations rather than deep end ones. So you arrive at school. You're not a Muslim. You're not from here. You're not from there. Presumably there weren't any other Iranian children.
There were one or two. Yeah, there was one or two. The Armenians. There was Armenians going on, and we had a whole Iranian community outside of school.
Right.
But hugely, because I'm bilingual. That makes a difference, because at home everything was Persian, everything was Farsi, and at school it wasn't. So it was really living in two different worlds. And I was taught, when my son was very little, my ex-husband and I are friends now, but when he was very little, we were not. And he found it, his behaviour was, he needed a bit of adjusting when he came back to me after his dad's.
Okay.
And I noticed that. And I said one day to him, I think I know how you feel a bit, because you go into this whole other world that mummy's not a part of. And then you get shot back into this world where there isn't a trace of daddy. And I think I get that, because that was like me with England and Iranian. It's almost like you're two different people in each one. And he was only about 6. And he went, I feel like I'm two people. And now me and his dad are, in and out of each other's houses all the time. And it's all fine. But I was quite pleased with my parenting.
Well, you spotted it, but only because you'd endured that. It's a duality that you describe, isn't it?
And it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing, but you are two different people. And so when I started, because, in an Iranian, community, I'm like, I'm a big deal, And then suddenly I'm on the circuit and everyone's like, so what do you do? Give me 5 minutes. I'm like, So it's like growing up as sort of, little Miss Iranian princess, but no one caring about that in my normal world.
But did you have a tough time at school, or were you just...
I had a horrible time at secondary school. I had a brilliant time at primary school. I went to a lovely twee little primary school where... I decided to talk posh.
Yes.
Because that way you got away with murder.
That's Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg are still proving on a daily basis.
It's unbelievable. And because I was, this isn't a nice thing to admit, but I used to feel quite embarrassed at how foreign my parents were. Yeah. They did things like they'd kiss my friends hello and goodbye. It's like, what are you doing? Because Iranians kiss all the time, willy-nilly. I said, no, don't kiss her. Leave Rebecca alone.
But all kids are embarrassed by their parents.
Now I realise that.
You just think it's unique, don't you? It's like Tolstoy. It's that idea that they're in their own special way. My mum has a Yorkshire accent, sent me to a posh school, and I cringe inside. It's like pouring vinegar on my soul when I remember being embarrassed about the fact that she had a broad Yorkshire accent, and some of the lads I was at school with would think that was a source of shame. I wish I could go back and punch them. Genuinely, and also give my mum a cuddle.
Because you feel bad, don't you?
You really do. It's like,
I've formally apologised to my parents for ever finding them their foreignness embarrassing. So, my mum would do things like just Iranians now. Obviously, it's different because we've been here a long time. But when they first came, they didn't really understand the 5 items or fewer. lane of the supermarket, just charge in there and and nice people in Marks and Spencer would go, bloody foreigners.
Of course they would.
And so I would speak like this. I'm sorry about my father. He didn't see. There wasn't a no donkey sign in the swimming pool. So I would just speak as posh and as Enid Blyton as possible to sort of counteract their foreignness.
When did you start making people laugh?
When I was 7. I did Margaret Thatcher impressions.
Straight in then?
Yeah, straight in. 79. So it was a mad year, 79.
Yes,
Thatcher came and the Ayatollah, ages I thought they were married. And then, so I learned quite quickly that impersonating this woman and, Spitting Image came along not long after that. And I just got absolutely mesmerised by comedy and impersonations. That was my thing, was impersonations. And my parents had endless parties. They had endless parties, and they'd always grab me when everyone was drunk enough. Shappi, come and be Thatcher. Shappi, be Thatcher. So I would be Thatcher. And I got a real taste for what it was like, how good it felt. And also I got a taste for how awful it felt when it didn't work. I died on my arse, aged 8.
Come on, they're just going to pretend that you're funny when you're 8.
You can see in their eyes, James.
You can tell. The smile is there, but the eyes are dead.
And then you finish and they go, isn't she charming? Then I'd go away and my dad would come and go, yeah, that wasn't a great one. That wasn't a great one.
Give you notes.
Oh, God, yeah. Oh,
because he saw you as a chip off the old block already?
Yeah, he did. And my dad set the bar quite high.
Clearly.
I remember I got a terrible review in Edinburgh once. I say once, like it's never happened. It's happened loads. I don't read them anymore. They don't get me. But I got this bad review. And I said to my dad, how do you feel when someone gives you a bad review? And he said, well, there's always going to be people whose opinions differ to yours. And I was like, no, I'm not talking about your opinions. I'm talking about when people say your work is bad. And he looked at me baffled. I was like, no one's ever done that, have they? No one's ever been able to. Hate you.
Thanks, Dad. Thanks for your support.
I think that's easier for me than for my brother because he's a boy and he's the firstborn.
Right.
And I think firstborns, there's a lot more pressure on them to sort of be chips off the old block.
It's a long shadow. Did your brother go down a similar route to you?
No, he was always the funny one.
Really?
And having been a child who sort of hung off my dad's coattails, I was fully expecting to hang off my brother's coattails. But no, it didn't happen. He hasn't got the ego to...
What do you mean by ego? Do you mean the look at me gene? Okay.
He doesn't have the look at me gene.
Which you both envy and also are grateful that you do, right?
I think so. I have it. I've had it.
Sure.
It's a disease.
Well, clearly. Margaret Thatcher impressions at the age of 8 is a bit of a clue, isn't it? But it is odd. You either have it or you don't. People don't get this. It's a slightly weird way to be made.
Yes. My daughter has it.
Right. But
my son doesn't.
There you go, you see. You guys, I think I'm the same. I think one of mine has got it. I'm not sure yet. And the older one hasn't. And yet they both like performing. They just don't have the look at me gene. It's weird.
Same as my children. My son loves performing. Absolutely can take or leave strangers thinking he's great.
Yeah. Maybe that's what it is. A degree of that desperation.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm sure my daughter came out of the egg like that. I'm sure I didn't do anything bad. I'm sure I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm sure it wasn't my fault. I think it's a compulsion. I think compulsion and addiction.
Does
and
your
I
dad
know a
have
lot of people. Oh my goodness!
I thought you'd say yes, but I just wanted to double check.
Jim, my dad, he told me that. Okay, so he had a mad childhood in rural Iran. You know, poor, uneducated family, and his dad. Who was educated, rumoured to have been a poet. Oh, come on, what Iranian isn't a poet? Jeez.
It's like the Irish.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know, the first time I went to Ireland, I was an adult, and I sat there in Cork, in a bar, and it was like being at one of my parents' parties. I was like, they are Iranian. Yeah. I get them.
Just a bit drunker.
I don't know. Well, Iranians can pack it away, but we're very controlled. I don't know why more isn't made of the difference between the Irish. I don't know how Irish people don't walk around all the time going, it's bonkers here. So his dad died when he was only 7. Wow. So then he was sent to a children's home in the city. To be educated. So that's it. From the age of 7, he wasn't raised around adults. And his birth certificate didn't belong to him. It belonged to this is a time in rural Iran, birth mortality rates were high. So my 2 grannies, one of them had 4 surviving children out of 9. The city granny had 9 surviving children out of 9. So I had like sort of, like the town and country mouse.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I've had it in like grandma form. So so he had a big brother who died called Hardy.
Oh.
And so when my dad was born, they just gave him the big brother's birth certificate. And so my dad said at a very young age, that he was tiny. He goes, I don't even remember how old I was because I was so small. He said, I'm going to be famous. So everyone knows my name because they keep getting my name wrong.
How quickly, after a fairly idyllic primary school, how quickly did you realise secondary school was going to be profoundly different?
Oh, day 2.
Seriously?
Day 1 was amazing. It was just like Grange Hill. Oh my God, it's like Grange Hill. Day 2, I was sat there and at primary school, because I'd been there from the age of 5, everyone accepted me for who I was, Chapperack.
Yeah.
I was Chapperack back then. And we had no money. So, my clothes weren't ever the latest fashion, but I was me. And I had big, massive frizzy hair that my mum cut herself. And I was fat. And I had 1 eyebrow. But I was great. And then I went to secondary school and everything changed. Everyone seemed a lot older than me. My first day, I took French elastic with me because I thought we could play French elastic.
Playground.
Oh, no. Every childhood thing had to be put away. And a girl turned around to me in assembly and said, Chapperack, you make me sick. And no one had ever been mean to me like that before. And I just wasn't equipped to deal with it. I was so sad. And then I was chronically dyslexic.
Okay.
And it was never picked up on. And I feel, I deal with it, but I feel a lot of bitterness towards my education. I know it was the 80s and all of that, but, I'm not a dummy.
No.
I got 4 GCSEs and they were all grade A's. So no one thought that this girl, she's clearly got something.
But we're not finding it.
Yeah, how can she fail so miserably at everything but just be good at these 4 subjects, which of course were double English, sociology and French.
Right. So dyslexia is a varied condition, but to get an A in double English, what were you struggling with then?
Well, my spelling was dreadful.
Oh, I see. But you could get your point across.
I could get my point across, and I still loved reading, although I could it's almost like later on, it's reading textbooks that are very difficult for me, so I have to practice. And it was my first essay back at university where the lecturer just wrote, "Are you dyslexic?" And I went to see him, and I had all the tests and everything, and it was really good actually. They said, "What you've done, because it was left undiagnosed, you have managed to figure out." My memory is incredible, and I've figured out ways to do things, and I avoid things that I find tricky.
So coping mechanism, essentially.
Yeah.
And also that speed of brain. It's something you've said about your dad as well, as he gets to the punchline of a joke 100 years before everybody else does. You clearly inherited that in a way that meant you could find your own way of fixing a problem when nobody else in the room knew that there was a problem there.
Absolutely. And I became a talker.
Right.
I talk, and I remember every detail of every conversation I've had with anybody. I remember little things about people that astound them when I mention it years later.
Okay.
I do all that. But at my school, there was a lot of bullying. Do you know that guy, Steve McQueen? 12 Years Slave.
Yeah, the film director.
He was 2 years above me at school, at my school. And I heard him on Desert Island Discs, and I read an article in The Guardian with him, and I cried because he described it perfectly.
Is that right?
Yeah, going to school like that, and then you're spending your adult life undoing all of the damage of being told you're thick or you're not going to get anywhere, and just finding some sort of steel inside you to cope, to not accept that. Yeah,
it's not inside you to start with, is it? When a girl turns to you and tells you that you make her sick, that's on the outside. You need to start. Did you start building layers of skin, or did you just sort of suffer?
No, I shrunk. I absolutely shrunk, and this has a lot to do with your own personality.
Yes.
I wish I'd been able to go home and tell my parents what she'd said. And so I think, well, in a way, that's kind of good because I kind of do know, I quiz my children if ever I think they're feeling sad, even without them saying anyone's being mean. I tell them that sometimes people are mean because they see something in you that they want to knock down.
Yeah.
They see a confidence in you. And I've noticed that as an adult. When I first started stand-up, sometimes people were really rude at parties.
Really?
Like, oh, the comedian's here. Oh, God, you don't say that on stage, do you? Or whatever, socially. Not anymore. Not like, since I've become a badass. But
Done all right.
But then I remember my brother said to me once, he goes, Shap, you come across as really confident and people think you can take it. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. I never saw it that way.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting.
It's 50-50, isn't it? Because you didn't come across on your second day.
I think I was quite loud and cheery.
You were still sort of giving it a vibe of confidence.
I was, but I came to school talking like this.
Yeah, so great.
Like, we're going to have so much fun. Is there going to be a school play? And there's kids going, you what?
Yeah.
What even is that? And then there was kids who are more streetwise than me from my school who dropped their middle-class accents the moment they walked through the gate.
So they knew.
I didn't have the nous to do that.
So fitting in is the thing, isn't it? And you just didn't.
No, and I wasn't in the smart bands. Like if you were like my best mate, who was like, a posh like me, but she was super smart and did Latin. So she was creamed off. 30 kids were creamed off in the accelerated learning class. And I was in a tricky situation because I was like good at English and French, but really poor at maths and sciences. And the school timetable didn't cater for me. They couldn't put me in the top sets for humanities and the bottom sets for sciences. And I shouldn't have been in the bottom set for sciences anyway, because I'm now really interested in it. It's just the way that it is in these schools that are so massive where you can't, I don't want to, it's a tricky thing because...
Well, there's no room for nuance, is there? You get put on your rails and you stay on them for the duration. I'm surprised how cross you still are about it.
I'm so upset about it still. Shaparak the Blob, my teacher called me.
Really?
Yeah. Isn't that terrible?
A reference to your weight?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is
and my lethargy. It's like I'm not lethargic. I'm terrified. There are some serious bullies in this class.
Yeah.
I got into a fight with somebody and it was just horrific. I just got attacked in the corridor.
For what, in your own mind, did you think you were being...
Okay, so what had happened was... Now, you got to bear in mind, I've grown up scrapping with my older brother. Yeah. I'm quite physically, I'm tough, right? I can have you.
Yeah, I don't doubt it for a minute, Shaparak.
But I'm not... that's not the way I operate. So there was a girl behind me and she was tugging at the hair of this really sweet girl. And this sweet girl kept saying, get off, get off, get off. And I turned around and said, leave her alone. Let's call her Susan. Leave her alone. And then she attacked me. Right. She went, what's it got to do with it? And that's what they do. They're just looking for it. So then, next thing I know, hair's being pulled, heads are being slammed against lockers, and the teacher yanks us both up. And of course, I'm told, we did not expect this of you, Shaparak. And all the tough kids were really surprised because I didn't cower. I just was like, fists up. And so they all came up to me and said, right, fight after school, and we're on your side, we're on your side. So they arranged this fight, and that was a real moment for me. I thought I could go to this fight after school, because if you were a fighty kid, you were in the in crowd, right?
Yeah, sure.
I could go to this fight after school, I could kick the shit out of this girl, and my social life at school is going to be amazing. I'll be in that group. Or I can get the 10p that my dad always gave me before school in case of emergencies. I can go to the school phone box and tell my dad to come pick me up at the opposite gate. So that's what I did. I crept out with my best friend and we got into my dad's car and went home. And the next day I was dead to everybody. You chicken, you chicken, you chicken. You didn't come to fight, you chicken.
Why didn't you?
Why didn't I? Because it's going to sound really fucking snobby. But I thought, you fucking losers are not going to go where I'm going in my life.
Yeah.
And if I hang out with you guys, I'm not going to achieve my goals. I'm not going to achieve my dreams.
Are you sure it was that articulated at the time? Is it?
At the time, absolutely. 100%.
Wow.
I wanted to work in show business. I wanted to meet interesting people. And I looked at that crowd and I thought, I don't want to be one of you. I'm not a fighter. I'm not a fighty person. This is beneath me. This is violent and it's beneath me. and I don't want to. So I don't know if that sounds horribly snobby, that I don't want to be a
thug.
That doesn't
sound remotely snobby.
But I didn't want to be a thug.
Fairly straightforward, a sensible course of action, isn't it? But at that age, of course, everything is times a million, isn't it? It's like living under a microscope lens. In your own mind, you're analysing everything and you're...
Absolutely. And then, and then you get to 15, 16 and you buy a pair of Doc Martens and you start writing Cure lyrics on your canvas bag and everything seems okay.
So when did you fit in?
When did I fit in? I think when I started doing stand-up.
Well, let's just pause there, because you said already at 14, 15 you knew you wanted to go into showbiz. You got your father's example, but that's not showbiz,
no.
Is it? That's the kind of, like I say, that Clive Jamesy cusp of entertainer and writer and satirist and a poet. So you knew it was a career option to just be funny on a stage?
No, I didn't. It was like I was saying, I want to go to the moon.
Yeah.
It was this bizarre thing. I was 15 years old, and I remember this Nigerian lady asked me directions near my parents' house. And my parents live on an industrial estate, so it's quite tricky if you don't know it to find a road, right?
Yeah.
And I said, I can walk you there, because I was a real sap that I always used to go to school really early to avoid the bullies on the way. So I've got a bit of time. So I walked with her, and she was like, this is very kind. I can't do a Nigerian accent. This is very kind of you. I was like, thank you, very kind. And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, and I established her name as Penny, because I'm very chatty. Yeah. And I said, do you know what? I've never, ever told anyone this before, but I want to be a stand-up comedian. And it felt so massive, those words coming out of my mouth. And I remember it. We were crossing a bridge over the North Circular Road near the Hanger Lane gyratory system.
I know, well, it's the one with the really long footpath.
Yeah. That was a lot of time for me to tell her my ambitions. And she was brilliant. She goes, maybe one day I'll see you on the television. I was like, maybe you will.
Let's just cue the music.
La, la.
Narrator. And she did.
And a mere 10 years later, there I was.
But genuinely, I mean, you didn't have a plan at this point. So you sixth form, you're a bit happier at school. You found a kind of
Yes, because
vibe.
by sixth form all the bullies left.
Right, you are, because they weren't doing A-levels. You were. You went off to college in Winchester, I think.
Yes, I went to Winchester and I left school. I did sixth form for a term, but we didn't do drama. And so I applied to Richmond College and they said, we've got no room on our drama course. So I went there for a term and I did politics instead. And then I met
very similar.
I know. I met a boy on a train who said, I was in the drama course, but my family's moving, we're leaving. So I marched into the office and I said, I know this is the boldest I've ever been. I know you have a space on your course. And they said, well, it's very tricky. I want to be bonded now. I was like, and do you know what I said?
Go on.
Oh, God. I can't believe I'm going to admit this, because I knew all the drama lot. And I said, okay, I just thought you might consider me, because I know that there's a space and you don't have any other ethnic minorities on the course. And they didn't.
Oh, that's it. They
didn't. Yeah. And I knew there was a space. And I said, is that why you're not letting me on? I'm not joking. I said that, and I said it so politely. And they gave me a space.
Yes. Well, why not?
But it was true, though.
Well, it had not exactly been a positive in your life in other areas, so why not?
I reckon they just thought, well, you're no Juliet.
It's a trend, yes, of course.
You know, you're no Hermione. What are we going to do with you?
What sort of things did you play then, once you started?
What, like plays and stuff?
Yeah, what sort of parts did you get?
I didn't get any. You didn't? Never.
But
no.
you do the exercises and you do the classes and you do the standing up on the stage and you look at me, Jean was growing slowly by the day.
Listen, James, that first day when I was in a room with black curtains all around it and a black floor, finding a space and making shapes and pretending to be trees, I felt like I'd come home.
Did you really? Because you had that inner life and you didn't really have anywhere to put it before.
No, and we had no drama at my school.
Right.
No, I think my life would have been very different. My kids have just started an after-school drama club. I thought, my life would have been so different to have had that. That would have been amazing. I wouldn't have cared what people at school said. But my parents wouldn't have known how to find they had a lot on their mind.
Yeah, and also it's a jungle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Negotiating opportunities for children.
Absolutely.
Same for me, oddly. It's odd parallels, given that our backgrounds are so different. But if I hadn't gone to... Krishnan and Gurumurthy was sitting there not long ago, and it turned out we'd both been in Manchester Youth Theatre, and we're both quite cocky kids, I guess, and clever kids. But for me, at an all-boys Catholic boarding school, if I hadn't gone in 1988 to Manchester Youth Theatre. Because I was going to mock you a bit for saying my life would have been different if I'd been to these drama classes. I can tell you my life is different because I got into the Youth Theatre in 1988, and suddenly you don't feel alone anymore. You just don't, or even different. You just feel, Christ, there's loads of people like me.
Yeah.
And some of them have got broad Chorlton-cum-Hardy accents, and some of them are as posher than I am. Maybe one of them was posher than I am, and some
no one's posher than you are.
Someone lived in Notting Hill, and someone lived in Stockport, and yet we all loved doing this weird thing.
And you know what? When you do something like drama, and there's a sort of egalitarian,
that's it.
Vibe to it,
yes,
and it helps enormously having your peers see you from a different angle, and see you with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
So.
And you see yourself.
You see yourself with fresh eyes, and you get so much confidence. The 1 or 2 times at school we had to read stuff out loud, and I was good at it. And other kids would go, "You're really good at acting, yeah?" I was like, "Thank you." I've never done acting though. Still to this day,
It's early days.
It's all comedy, exactly. I'm only 25.
First, we should hop a bit because I get an idea of what college was and what college meant.
Yeah.
A bit of drama, broadening horizons.
No, do you know what? My university course, drama, theatre and television, none of it was performance-based. It was all drama, theatre and television for development. It was run by experimental.
Bizarre course.
I know. It doesn't exist anymore.
You surprised me.
No, it was just someone complained.
Yeah.
Someone on the course complained and said it was left-wing indoctrination.
Really?
Yeah.
I get that a lot with my radio show.
Maybe that's why I love it. Oh my gosh. I've been brainwashed. I'm really a Tory.
So you weren't being slowly turned into a Bonnie
it was
Langford of
all about community theatre, drama for
that kind of Joan
absolutely.
Littlewood type worldview.
I remember one of the first things we did was look at Cathy Come Home.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind. So it wasn't a jazz hand drama course at all. I thought it was. On the first day, when they told us about, kept talking about hegemony and Cathy Come Home and African drama, I put my hand up and I said, "Are we doing an end of term show?" And they went, "Did you read the prospectus?" No.
It's just saw drama.
But Winchester was pretty.
And all of this. Yeah. Love it. But presumably now, during these 3 years, the stand-up act starts developing, or no, later?
No, later. I was still absolutely just so shy and
yet not shy, because you can talk to Penny on the bridge at Hanger Lane.
I can do that. But at college, when we're all together and everyone's being boisterous, I could never. And what I found quite difficult, I think, having an older brother. God, I love my brother. He's my best friend. But growing up, I was like the idiot little sister. If I talked, shut up, Shap, shut up, Shap. And I always felt like boys would always just tell me to shut up. I think that's not anyone's fault.
No.
We are who we are. And so I always felt quite shy about speaking up in a crowd and all of that. So I just get drunk an awful lot, far, far, far too much. But I sort of shuffled out of university and I still just wanted to do comedy.
Right.
There was nothing else. And everyone else was sending off CVs and getting jobs here, there, whatever. I wasn't interested. So I got a job at Pret a Manger and I worked in a call centre, worked at Pret a Manger, I did life modelling and I did cleaning. So those are what I did. I had no interest.
It's real bread and butter stuff then.
Yeah, I had no interest in getting a job in a place where I could move forward or having a career as a TV producer or all the other things that we wanted to do. And the best thing that happened to me then was I got a place on this community theatre project in Finsbury Park called the Leveners Arts Theatre, Leveners Arts Theatre. And it was a project working with raising awareness about homelessness amongst people who've left care or prison.
Oh, wow.
And I was told it was really hard to get a place there. There's only 10 places. And that morning, I had a horrific fight with my dad. He was so mean to me. And I was just full of rage and anger that I've always, right, we're doing this, are we, Dad, today? We're doing this, are we? Because other times my dad is an angel. You should never always have to see who you get. So I went so angry. And I had a pint before the interview. How crazy is that? And I sat down. It was one of those situations where I was not going to not get it.
Yeah, I get you.
I was not going to not get that place.
Taking no prisoners.
Absolutely. And I got it. And all of the theory that I'd learned at university, we were putting in practice.
Oh, wow.
Those people, I was the only one on the project that hadn't had personal experience of street homelessness. So I was working with these people. Like, one of them stole my bag. It was incredible, and it absolutely changed my life. It absolutely changed my life, and it gave me so much confidence. And after
Why? Why did it give you so much?
because I was with people who got me. I was with people. The whole
Even though they were people from an utterly alien
absolutely
world.
The nature of community theatre is acceptance and feeling like you matter. So this is why I feel people laugh at me for saying this, but I think that we should really fund it for people who are in dire straits, those sort of like troublemaker people, because it matters if you don't turn up for a rehearsal. You're missed. Yeah. Your part is important. You're part of a group.
You matter.
You matter. And I felt like I mattered, and it was the first time I really felt that I was, that.
And you were pulling people with you as well. You weren't just finding a role for yourself, or you were, but that role involved helping other people. So how do we move from there to when did you first?
Comedy.
Yeah, when did you?
Well, the facilitators of that course, we all had a little like appraisal of where they thought we could go, and I decided that I wanted to work in the Simon community, which is a residential community for alcoholics. Really bad idea, because I was so massively busted up with addiction and alcohol as well
but
at
you didn't
that
know
time.
that really
I didn't know that.
Sure.
I thought, I'm just being young.
Yeah.
And they had a prospectus for the City Lit College in Holborn. And they said, they do a stand-up comedy course. Shappi, you're really funny. Everyone says you're really funny. I was funny.
Yeah, sure.
I was funny.
I believe you.
I used to be socially way more funnier when I wasn't a comic. Now that I'm a comic.
Use up your best stuff.
God, I'm so serious. Now that I'm a professional comedian, I'm so serious. I have to live with myself. So I went and did this course, which didn't teach me much other than it introduced me to other comedy obsessives. And then I lived on the London comedy circuit like a rat.
As a performer?
No, as a punter.
You mean as a punter? Yes,
as a
that's
punter.
what I thought you meant.
And,
so you're it's osmosis. You're just absorbing and absorbing and absorbing.
Absolutely. And then during the course, I got together a 5-minute set that I then took around the clubs.
Tell me about the first time.
First time, I got laughs and I got £5.
Wow.
He gave me £5 because it was my first one. And there was a guy there called, oh my God, why have I forgotten his name? He wrote The Office with Ricky Gervais.
Stephen Merchant. All 6'7".
All big, tall man. He goes, oh, hello. And he was like, pushing up his glasses, and he was kind of, taking his first floundering steps as well. And it was amazing. And that was that.
Well,
I didn't go travelling. I didn't go on holiday. Why would you? All the good stuff's at home. That's what I did. But I did the same set for far too long. You've
done it again. You're so self-critical.
Oh, of course I am.
But it's so long ago now.
I know. But when I just think about my 20s, when I had no children and I had all the time in the world.
Oh, no, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
To
all the
work
things you could
and
have
be...
done.
No, but what I did was drink and be crazy and be really stagnated in my thought processes with comedy because I was so terrified of it all.
So when it worked, you stuck with it.
I stuck with
it. And then you stuck with it, and then you stuck with it some more.
Yeah, and I sort of hung myself.
So what broke that cycle then?
A recovery.
Oh, really? Yeah. So you do see it that clearly. It was all linked. So you were just on a treadmill.
Yeah.
Or on an exercise bike.
Yeah. It's funny. Like sometimes like reviewers have written stuff like, "Oh, Shappi Khorsandi was treading water for many years before."
Okay.
And it was noticed, and people said to me like, because I was 31, and I started stand up at 23.
Yeah. And
I got into a 12-step program at 31, and I had a year of abstinence. So this is 2006, and I had a year of abstinence, and that was the year that I wrote Asylum Speaker, which was my breakthrough show, and that's why. That's why I understood where days begin and end. I understood.
And is that because your brain is cushioned when you're drinking? It's because you kind of have your reality is slightly dulled, so you don't. Let yourself, because this brain you've clearly got, this is turbocharged brain, you would be putting it constantly in third and never letting it go into fifth?
It was... I have to say, it wasn't drink. Drink was not my primary. God, all this therapy speak. It's not my primary addiction. It's other stuff. But the way I describe it is, you've seen American Werewolf in London, or
not for a while.
Any werewolf film where the guy's kind of okay, and then he sees his hands get big, and then hair sprout out, and he's terrified, and he knows it's happening. But then it crosses the Rubicon, and that's it. He becomes a wolf, and he creates carnage and mayhem, and then he wakes up full of shame, full of rage. He's caused devastation and mayhem, and he's really, terrified it will happen again. And of course it does, again and again and again and again and again. And when you're in that cycle, for me, some people are really highly functioning addicts.
Sure.
For me, it just meant that my career was not creatively, I wasn't moving anything forward. It was just at the clubs.
And it all fell into place? It takes some effort. No one's pretending recovery is easy. 12 steps can be an absolute... I mean, many people never make it to 12. They never sort of get a hand. But it all seems to feed off each other. If the success propels the recovery...
I never made it to 12.
Did you not?
No.
Well, I don't really know what I'm talking about, Shappi, to be honest with you.
But that's okay.
12 is 12. 12 is enlightenment, like Buddha, is it?
I'm not Buddha yet.
But you take my point. It was working.
Of course, yeah.
You got over the obstacles you needed to get over.
Yeah.
And that is rendered much easier. The struggle is rendered much easier by the visible signs of succeeding, which are happening in work.
That was exciting. I had a gig in a club called Jongleurs in Edinburgh, and I met my husband, who's also a comedian, and I fell in love. And he was the first person that I told. I remember him saying to me that night that he gave up smoking, and after he gave up smoking, he did stand up because he felt that smoking was giving up was the impossible thing, and if he could give up that, he could do stand up. Yeah. And I thought, I've got an impossible thing too. And then when we sort of, fell in love, he was like, you need to... I thought, I want to enjoy life with you. I had sounds really pathetic, but I didn't really see a reason to have a life before. But then I met him and I fell in love. I was like, life's great, isn't it? Right. Life's amazing. I've got some happiness. And so I went into recovery, and everything career-wise went up, and then I got divorced, and then it went crashing down again. Did
it? Yeah. Because the divorce was ugly. It's nice.
I didn't deal with it in a Zen-like way.
So to step onto the stage and be hilarious when you're dying inside is presumably not the easiest thing in the world to do.
I took everything I got for granted. I cried and wailed. I had a manager who very sweetly and honestly said to me, "Babe, you're becoming the divorce bore. You're clearing rooms." I was heartbroken. I felt like... My dad said it's the first time in your life that you felt defeated. I felt defeated. Oh, wow. There was no way of my fixing this. And we had a baby, and I was like, I didn't plan on being a single mom. Yeah. And then the worst thing, I had this boy, my child, and now I was being told that 3 nights a week my baby wouldn't be with me. And I could not accept that. I did not. I kicked and I screamed, and there was no acceptance for a very long time, but now it's all fine.
You're not angry with me, you're angry with something else, but I'm the only one here.
Oh, my son said that to me. Oh.
At about this point in your life?
Yes, he said that to me when he was 3. Killed me.
I bet.
I still cuddle him now. He's 10 now, and every now and then I'll just attack him from behind and in a bear hug and kiss him and go, "I'm so sorry."
Another 2 years, I reckon, of that, if you're lucky.
Oh, God, don't.
Get off me, Mum.
I already get that.
Do you?
Oh,
it's
no,
about
Mum.
to go up a level.
He said to me this morning, "Mum, you can kiss my elbow." It's like, thanks.
He's cool. I love him.
He's very cool. Yeah.
But we're going to run out of time, and we need to bring ourselves bang up to date. So we'll move briefly over the books that you've written. A Beginner's Guide to Acting English, which is a memoir, effectively. You've said you didn't like the title.
No, I didn't like the title, no.
And then the novel.
I like the book. I have to stress I love the book, but not the title.
And then what should you have called it?
English People Smell of Milk.
That's lovely, actually. And then the novel, which did extremely well, Nina Is Not Okay. Again, very autobiographical. Mm-hmm. But just briefly, because I want to talk about the new show, Mistress and Misfit, or the touring show. Why did you pull out of an award that was specifically for writers of a black and minority ethnic background?
The reason I pulled out of that award was because I I didn't know who decides where white ends and BAME begins.
Yeah.
Who decides that? And who decides for my children who are half English and one of them, you'd never question their Englishness and the other one looks more like me.
Yes.
So one of them would be eligible for this and not the other. Who decides all that? And I joke that the judges were 3 literary experts and a man from Dulux. And also what I felt was for those reasons.
Fair enough. Would you go on an all-women shortlist? So it's a little easier to distinguish, although that world is moving a little as well.
Well, that's half the population, but this is... you know what? There was some logic to a woman. Like my character's a woman. I'm a woman. I have been told I am BAME. And they keep changing the terminology for non-white people.
Yes.
Just in case we start to feel at home. I don't know why it happens.
You'll get used to it.
Yeah, writer of colour.
Yeah.
I said on the Today programme, writer of colour makes me sound like a crayon. And I didn't mean to sound ungrateful when I withdrew. But then, for example, I can get it if it's like, okay, English is a second language or immigrants, but like Polish writers are not included in this.
No, and yet...
we don't include the experience of white, immigrants, and they are under my umbrella. My Bulgarian neighbour read my book, my first book, and she stopped me on the street today, and she said, I related so much, and because Bulgaria is right on the edge of the Middle East and all of this, and I was like, you're white, mate. No one's interested in your stories.
So that makes a lot of sense, actually. Well, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
so
it did
with
to
the
me.
Next book, get nominated for a Booker and you won't have any problems at all.
I'll be fine with that.
There'll be no nuances. So Mistress and Misfit,
yes.
You seeing your life through the lens of Emma Hamilton, Nelson's mistress.
Well,
Where did that come from?
We did a play about Nelson at school.
Yeah.
We did a play at primary school about Horatio Nelson.
The vicar's son from Norfolk.
Absolutely. And Tanya Forward played...
She's still bitter.
Emma Hamilton.
I know. It's great.
Do you know what? I was never Mary in the school play. I was so bitter about that. And I joke about that. I was the only Middle Eastern virgin in the class. And do you know what? When my daughter was cast as Mary last year in the Nativity play, you have never seen an atheist.
Lap of honour.
So proud. I was in the audience just cheering.
Did you give her notes afterwards?
No, I was just, honestly, I just thought everything is vindicated now. This is all I've ever wanted. My flesh and blood is the lead part in a school play. I was always the narrator. Because you've got a loud, clear voice.
Right, but narrator is often the biggest part, but it was never quite the same as acting.
I know. So we did a play about Nelson, and I was mesmerised by that period of history. I still have a keen interest in naval history, the press gangs. I mean, what isn't there to love about that? And then I got older, and I think if you had the sort, I don't want to say school like mine, because that school still exists and people do the best they can. I know, but in the 80s, the schools that I went to, you sort of had to educate yourself as an adult.
Yeah, I understand.
So I did go back to a lot of the stuff that we did at school that I didn't get at the time. The Corn Laws, the suffragettes, Nelson. I went back over all of these things as an adult. And one thing I was fascinated by with Nelson and Emma was the fact that he was genuinely, madly and passionately in love with her. She wasn't just like a hot bit on the side. And before he went into the Battle of Trafalgar, when he could see the Spanish fleets on the horizon, he sat down and he wrote a codicil to his will. And he asked his king and country, in the event of his death, to look after Emma Hamilton and Horatia, their daughter. And they didn't. They didn't. And they allowed her to spiral into alcoholism and debt. And she had to flee to Calais. And she died as a refugee in Calais. And I just thought, wow, at school they just said, kiss me, Hardy, thank God I did my duty. And they have erased the impact that this woman, this incredible woman, had on his life. And, that column is so high because no one can look him in the eye because of what they did to him. And I've made it into a comedy show.
Well, that's well. I was trying to find a way to steer you back to that while wiping a tear from my eye at the picture you painted of Emma Hamilton's betrayal, because that's not very funny.
No.
I know this. I'm not the comedian, but that's not a funny story.
No, but thankfully, 20 years of experience has allowed me to make it funny.
To see the funny and also to see the parallels. We have to be clear about this. You draw parallels between your life and Emma Lady Hamilton's. I like the one of the explanations you've given is that, because we've mentioned pigeonholes right at the beginning and we're almost at the end, this is almost the definition of how you defy pigeonholing.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I just completely went into Trafalgar Square and all the pigeons. You got to stop.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I have to say, pigeons play a big part in my show.
Right.
So I was like, oh, what's it going to mention about the pigeons?
Just the holing.
Just that.
But you take almost a sort of a misunderstood and largely unknown emblem of Englishness.
Absolutely.
And make it your own.
Yeah, and she was sort of derided as just some prostitute. Oh, she worked in a brothel. She did a billion things. Okay, you know, she worked in a brothel for a bit, but that's 1 in 6 women in London back then worked as sex workers in Covent Garden. And there was something called the Harris List, which had a review of all the prostitutes. And she was on that. And the parallels I draw isn't just with me and her. She was a single mum. I was a single mum. She was a life model. I was a life model. And I've had really sketchy times in my life when, you know, some might say that I've done, you know, used sex as a means to an end in my misspent youth. And crucially, when I read that she had to give her first daughter away, she had to give her up to avoid destitution, it made me think of my own grandmothers. You know, my great-grandmother was born in destitution. She was married off when she was a child. She got divorced. She had my granny when she was only 12 years old. And the price she paid for her divorce was losing her child. So my granny was fostered. She was married off at the age of 12. And then that stopped with my mum. My mum got married at 23.
Right.
And that stopped in our family. I do genuinely think that forced marriage stopped in our family. But forced divorce was implemented because
no other kind, really.
All the women in my family are so pro-divorce.
Are they really?
I think the background that we come from justifies it a bit.
You're on the road with it now.
Yes, I am.
People can find tickets at shappi.co.uk.
Yes, they can indeed.
What happens with the kids when you're touring?
I have 2 of them now. I have a 4-year-old girl. They have my mum and my dad and my au pair, William.
And you're cool, because you did mention just a moment ago 3 nights a week not seeing my...
Yeah, it's awful. Well, that's different.
Right.
That's if I'm going away to earn the beans.
Yeah.
They come with me in the holidays.
So you just process it differently. It's
yeah.
A different thing. It's your job.
It's my job, and I
would ask a man that if he'd said to me at the beginning of the interview that I hated it because I was away from my child for 3 nights a week, or would I? Have I just realised that when my wife watches this, she will say to me, "You wouldn't have asked a man that," and I'll get into trouble.
Oh, that didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah.
When
I'm
I said
trained.
With my divorce, the crucial thing was I felt like my son went off into the abyss. I had no access to him for those 3 days.
So that's why you had to be with him.
I didn't know where he was sleeping that night.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't know where he was sleeping that night. I didn't know what he was doing. And then when I go away for work, if it's in the holidays, my kids come with me. We went on a brilliant tour of the Highlands all together. Yeah, it's amazing. Absolutely. My son comes on stage and does a turn.
No way.
My daughter starts...
Margaret Thatcher impression?
No, he's so funny. He just improvises. Yeah. He's very
Seriously?
funny. Yeah. But my daughter is not allowed to come on stage with me anymore because the last time she came on stage, she wouldn't get off. And I will allow my son because he gets it. It's a privilege.
Yeah.
You can't just come on, look cute and refuse to get off. She needs it.
Oh,
Therefore, I'm trying to help her be calm about it.
Right.
But being away from them is horrible. But I hate saying that because I don't want people to watch my show and think, oh, she's really hating being in Aberystwyth.
No, you certainly haven't given that impression. Although while you've picked on Aberystwyth, you'll just have to explain.
I'm not even on there.
Very carefully, very diplomatically done. Shappi, what an absolute pleasure. Actually, before we... And what ambitions are left for you?
I've written another novel.
Yes.
And I would very dearly like to see Nina's Not Okay in some live form. Is
that looming closer?
I hope so.
Okay.
It's been optioned by someone. So we'll see. But I would very much like to write for screen.
Thank you. Hello, I'm James O'Brien. Thank you for watching this episode of Unfiltered. Not only is there plenty more where that came from, but there's plenty more to come as well. So make sure you subscribe to Unfiltered and put yourself at the front of the queue for all forthcoming interviews.